Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Fantasy Friday with Johnny Tiger on July 2nd, 2021. I hope those of you who are watching this from Canada have had a beautiful Canada Day celebration. I know there wasn't much of a celebration this year. In fact, we were encouraged to use it as a day to reflect uh, on the done to the native Aborigine First Nation people by the residential school. Now, however, me being very callous, very uh, uh, shallow, Taiwanese, Chinese, Canadian, I feel that I really don't have that much to reflect because I didn't do anything to Aborigine people. My ancestor didn't do anything to First Nation people. My people have nothing to do with residential school. Uh, so while there's a big part of me, and no mistake about it, there's a big part of me that's due that does sympathize and feel that it is something that definitely need to be addressed, that it is something that is horrible that it happened. Uh, for the most part, I view the whole situation from a third party, a bystander point of view. I do not feel any guilt. I do not feel the remorse or guilt that my government tried to say that I should spend this day feeling. So this is a long-winded way to say I did go out and I had a beautiful afternoon celebrating, sitting in the yard with a handful of good friends. We had a barbecue, drank a lot of beer, and this is why there wasn't a Toy Thursday yesterday. Okay, so that's why we are doing this today. It's a Fantasy Friday. So what is this fantasy business about? Well, I read a lot of books. And this is not my way of saying that I'm really smart or I'm really good at studying or stuff like that. This is just me saying I read a lot of books. It's something that I do for fun. And for the most part, that does not make me smarter because I read what I usually refer to as junk food book. What is junk food book? Then fiction. They are usually very violent and consist of things that do not exist, like dragons and wizards and mages and magic and some evil dark lord trying to take over the world. I just love that stuff. I gobble up fiction, fantasy books like they're going out of fashion. Uh, some people asked me before, "So what attracts you to fantasy book? Why do you like them that much? Is it the sword? Is it the horses? Or is it the beautiful elven maidens? Or the voluptuous barmaid? Or the knights in shiny armor? What is it that you like them so much?" So, well, I think the best answer I can give you is because I feel that in real life we face a lot of weariness, we face a lot of cruelty, we face a lot of things that, if we make a wrong decision, it does matter. It does matter. If we say the wrong thing, it does matter. I feel that life is very serious for the most part and sometimes very tiring, very dreary. So if I can escape from this reality into a reality where honor actually means something, where having a strong swordsmanship actually means that you will get a beautiful girl or you will get the gold and jewels you desire, and where it means the only thing you really need to do is go slay a dragon and you will solve the world's problem. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. Like I'm perfectly happy being shallow or being wasteful of times if that means I can escape into that beautiful, fantastic world where unicorns exist, where dragons exist, where giants walk the earth and the line between good and evil is very clear defined. There's no confusion. If you are a hero, you are good. If you are a dark lord, you are bad. Something simple and beautiful. That is the kind of world I like to escape into. So, it is in that spirit I'm going to spend the next four episodes of Toy Thursday, including this one, even though this is called Fantasy Friday. I'm going to spend the next four episodes uh, showing you characters from four of the uh, most influential, most popular, and most, uh, shall we say, traditional fantasy series that every almost I would say almost every fantasy reader would have come into contact with. I won't say that we necessarily like all of them because God knows that there are a lot of fantasy novels that a lot of people like that I myself just don't really care for. Harry Potter being one of them, but that's just another story for another day. But the four fantasy series I'm going to show you and illustrate with characters and action figures are the giants of the giants. They are the must read, at least must know, if you want to call yourself a connoisseur of fantasy books, of high fantasy, medieval fantasy, sword and sorcery fantasy. You have to at least know about these four different sets of characters and their world and their stories. I first came to Canada when I was in grade three, and then because my stepmother hated me and wanted to get me deported, she decided to destroy my passport and immigration document. I heard that's actually illegal, so I don't know why she didn't go to jail for it. But anyway, she did. She destroyed all my documents, so I ended up having to move back to Taiwan when I was grade five. When I was in grade five, and it took 3 years before my father could get things all sorted out, and I could come back to Canada again. So by the time I finally came back to Canada, I was just about to go into grade nine. And like most immigration, like most immigrant, like most, I would dare say probably not only immigrant, like most people in that age, I struggled with English class. I'm not talking about classes that speak or spoke English. I mean, all the classes spoke English, but actual English class, Shakespeare and all those stuff. Wow. Especially, can you imagine, just for a second, just imagine that you are a new immigrant. You're new in this country. You barely know your good mornings from your good evenings from your good night. In fact, you barely know how to explain what's the difference between a good night and a good evening. And then when you go to school, they tell you you have to read this thing that it doesn't even look like it's written in proper English. Yeah, that's what I thought. Like back then, when I saw all the these and thys and thous and thou hard and blah 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 to be or not to be and all that stuff, I was thinking, is this written by an immigrant too? Like this person doesn't know how to speak English? What's going on? I can't make heads or tail of it. I knew those were English words, and if I enter each individual one of them into a dictionary, the dictionary tells me, thou means you, and thee also means you, and thy means yours. Yeah, the dictionary will tell me that. But the way the phrases were put together, they didn't make sense. So I struggled through my first Shakespeare play. It was, uh, uh, unfortunately, it was Hamlet, and it was hard. So I almost cried my way through Shakespeare in the beginning because I didn't like it. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't understand why we needed to learn it because it's so dry and it's not useful at all, at least from my perspective. And the stories that weren't even all that interesting, really. Eventually, I got better with reading Shakespeare, and now I can pick up a Shakespeare play and basically get 99% of the meaning just reading it through. Uh, but I still don't say I still wouldn't say I enjoy it. However, I remember I think this was in English 11, grade 11 English, when I was introduced to what is said to be the oldest legend, the oldest, one of the first fantasy written for the Anglo-Saxon people. That's you whiteys, by the way. No offense, but yeah, that's Anglo-Saxon. That's basically you whiteys. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. Um, I came in contact with the legend of Beowulf, and I was captivated. I was entranced because by grade 11, I already started to become a big fan of medieval fantasy, swords and sorcery, knights and armor and dragon and dark magician, witches and wizards and stuff like that. I already started my long, long journey into becoming a big fan of high fantasy and epic fantasy. So at that time, I kind of thought, wow, this is so cool. This is so cool. Now, in Chinese culture, we don't get the same kind of epic fantasy as we see in English. Most of the what we would call fantasy in Chinese culture largely evolve around kung fu and martial art. So there's very little about rescuing the princess. There's very little about fighting in some war between kingdoms and then get mountains of gold and then go on to conquer some foreign demonic land to reclaim them for the humans. There's very little supernatural stuff, in another word, when you read Chinese fantasy. So when I first discovered high fantasy and medieval fantasy and epic fantasy, I was totally captivated. I thought this was like something new. I thought this was like the coolest thing there was. And then I was shown in English 11 that way back in 8th century, in 8th century, Anglo-Saxon people already had their first written medieval high fantasy, and that was the legend of Beowulf. Beowulf was presented in the format of a poem, and the poem is very, very long, so I'm not going to stand here and recite it because I don't have it memorized. I used to. When I was in school, I actually did have it memorized, but uh, trying to pull that out of my memory now is almost impossible. But it's such a uh, easy to find because it's so often used in English literature in school. So any one of you can go on Google and look up the poem or the legend of Beowulf. That's Beowulf. 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 So we can actually say that Beowulf is probably one of the first ever, if not the first ever, fantasy hero in English literature. Little did I know that about almost 20 years later, that the story of Beowulf would get made into a animated movie, a CGI movie, and it was quite enjoyable. Actually, I watched it. It deviates a lot from the original story because the original story definitely didn't say Beowulf killed the monster Grendel and then went on to have sex with Grendel's mom, and they had a son together, and that son turned into a new monster. That definitely was not in the original uh, poem. The original poem said Beowulf killed Grendel and then killed Grendel's mother, and then a few years later went on to fight a dragon, but that dragon had no relation to Grendel's mother or anything. It's just a dragon. Um, so in the movie, they made it kind of a little bit more erotic, and they made Beowulf killed Grendel, and then he ended up having sex with Grendel's mom, and then they have their offspring turned into a fire dragon, and so on and so on. It's kind of wacky there. But if you take it on its own as a modern interpretation, it was kind of enjoyable and definitely cool to see one of the uh, earliest record of medieval or epic high fantasy for human beings turned into a CGI movie. And then, because of that movie, we got, of course, action figures, which is why we are here today. Now, I don't have the entire run of the Beowulf action figures because well, there were only four, and they were not really that good for various reasons. I'm going to talk more about why they're not good as we look at the two figures I have today. The Beowulf action figures were produced by Todd McFarlane, and I've talked a lot about McFarlane in the previous Toy Thursday, so I don't really need to elaborate too much. Suffice to say, I have always been a big fan of almost anything McFarlane produced, uh, and I have a huge collection of McFarlane's toy creation through the 90s to through 2000s, and lately he has made a comeback, and now he's making Mortal Kombat and DC superhero and The Witcher action figures. It's some really good stuff going on with Todd McFarlane. He is still as flaky as ever, kind of which is very stressful trying to collect his action figures because you never know if he's going to follow through or not. A lot of time he'll only make like two or three, and then he move on to some new property and he abandons the project. So you end up with a very incomplete collection, such as the case with Beowulf. Now here in front of the camera we have Beowulf. This is a young Beowulf. Uh, Before he got old and tired and all that stuff, this is a young warrior Beowulf, and he's he got a long ponytail, kind of like mine. Um, his hair, very generic, kind of parted in the middle, tied back. Did they even do their hair like that in the back in the 8th century? I don't know. That kind of seemed a little bit like a modern Steven Seagal kind of look. He got his sword in his right hand, and on his left hip you can see the sword sheath hanging from his belt, and there's a battle horn also hanging from his belt. And he's in a very dynamic lunging pose with his sword held in the what we call the backhand, and his left hand is the leading hand that just sweeping out in front of him like that. Very dynamic, classic fencing pose. He's dressed in pretty simple, form-fitting leather armor with a chest plate and uh, a little bit of plating on his arm. and there are greaves on his shin. But for the most part, he's very lightly armored. He's not like uh, going to war like a medieval knight. This was, in a sense, this was before people started dressing in full armor. This was back when armor was very simple, just leather chest plate and leather gauntlet and leather greaves for the most part. Beowulf here is articulated at the left arm, left wrist, right elbow, right wrist, and his his shin also swivel. But that's it. Oh yeah, and his waist turn. You can get his body upper torso to swivel around like that. So that's one option with this figure. However, like most of McFarlane's creation back before he discovered how to make articulation, this is more of a statue than an action figure. Even with all those articulation, you can maybe only get a couple of poses out of him. His legs, they're locked out in that position. There's no way for you to close his leg. They're not going to move to anything. So the pivot or not the pivot, the swivel in his shin, all they do is allow you to make him stand a little bit more stable. And the right and the left arm is permanently sticking out to the side like he is pointing. So there's no way for him to put his arm down. You can get him to go palm up, palm down, but that's it. Okay, that left arm is stuck there. Right arm, same story. It's permanently in that holding back, ready to stab forward pose. So you can get it to hold the sword out by his face or point it down near his chest, but that's it. Okay, there's just not a lot you can do with this figure. No matter how you pose him, it's basically in that. I'm going to lunge forward and stick you with the sword, pointy end into the enemy pose. However, I knew that when I bought him, and I just got him because, well, hey, like I said, he's like the first ever fantasy hero in Anglo-Saxon uh, history, and some someone that I actually read about when I was in English 11. I have to get him. Like he's just iconic, and he's a piece of my childhood almost. Now, other than the lousy articulation or the lack of articulation, there's another problem with the character design here. In the original story, Legend of Beowulf, uh, let me quickly recap what Beowulf was basically about. Beowulf's dad is a very renowned warrior, and one time he killed another warrior, and to escape the vengeance of that other warrior's clan, him and his wife and baby Beowulf, they ran away and went to another country. And uh, the king of that country, King Hrothgar, helped them find a place to live and get established and avoid being tracked down by people who wanted to have vengeance upon them. When Beowulf grew up, he became a very renowned adventurer and warrior, and he led his own band of men, and they basically went around doing what a lot of warriors like to do back then: pillaging, killing, fighting, slaying dragons, and accumulating treasures. I didn't say any raping because I don't. I think heroes were not supposed to do things like that, but yeah, I mean, it's up to your own interpretation. I kind of think that Beowulf were like, the old Viking warriors, probably pillaging, raping, burning houses down, stuff like that. But hey, no, let's not taint our heroes. Anyway, uh, I digress a little bit. So one day, Beowulf got a letter from King Resgard and telling him that they had been attacked uh, by this monster that lived in the fen. The fen is basically the swamp, marshland area near the palace. So King Resgard, I'm like trying to say this in like plain modern English in modern way. So I'm not going to all the high fantasy jargons and old English poetry stuff, right? So anyway, old King Resgard told Beowulf that, hey, I hear that you are now very, very accomplished. You are a great warrior. Some people say you are the greatest in the world. You are the strongest warrior among men. Well, we've been having problem with this monster. In the middle of the night, this monster come out of the swamp and come into the palace, and it's a giant beast of monster. It's bigger than any man and stronger than anybody, and it has skins covered in scales and warts, so enchanted that uh, no weapon can hurt the monster. Spears or swords or even the finest steel would just bounce off the monster, and it's been killing our soldiers in the middle of the night. Can you do something about it? Well, Beowulf, being young and impulsive and very confident in his ability, and also his dad kind of owed King Hrothgar a favor for helping them relocate, said, "Hell yeah! Okay, show me where's the monster. I'll come deal with him." So Beowulf took his men, sailed all the way to uh, where the kingdom is, and they stayed in the palace, waiting for the monster to show up. The monster turned out to be this giant, grotesque monster called Grendel. Now, Grendel lived in the swamp where all the filth and dirty and putrefaction were going on. It's a monster that was born of hatred. Why did Grendel come onto the land to kill people? Well, because apparently King Hrothgar threw some of the best parties around back then. So every night, when Grendel was trying to sleep, when Grendel was feeling lonely and miserable, because he's a giant monster, no one wanted to be his friend. So Grendel sit in his cave, feeling misery, and 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 there's swamp all around him, so everything's wet and yucky and uncomfortable. And Grendel just wanted to have friends, and Grendel sit in his cave and hear all these young warriors and their maidens laughing and cavorting and drinking and singing karaoke. Well, okay, they didn't call it karaoke back then, but I'm sure they were beating on drums and singing and playing instruments and telling jokes and having a good old time every night. Now, you just imagine that for a second. If you are someone who's out or rejected by the society because you don't look like other people, if you are big and ugly and you look like a monster, so people cast you out, and you sit there in your cave, you're hungry, you're angry, you're miserable, you're wet, and you have to listen to that every night. Yeah, I mean, we can kind of, if we look at it that way, we can kind of understand why Grendel finally said, the hell with this. I'm going to show you guys how I party. So Grendel come out of the swamp, going to the palace every night, and started killing people. If those people would only know, all they had to do was pipe down. Keep it quiet at night, obey the city bylaw. Okay? Yeah, I mean, we all have noisy neighbors before that party all night when we have to work next day and we are having problems sleeping because of their noise. You probably felt something like Grendel. You probably felt like if it's not illegal, I would go upstairs or I'd go next door and do this, and that to them. Yeah, so that's basically the situation. These young warriors, they were loud and obnoxious, and Grendel couldn't sleep, so he decided to go kill them. Well, this night, Grendel came into the palace and started killing people. It was said that Grendel was so powerful and had some kind of evil magic around him that even if you shut the palace door and barred it, one touch of his hand would cause the door to open. And because his the scales that cover his skins were enchanted with magic, no one could hurt him with any weapon. So when he came into the palace that night and started eating people, yeah, he didn't just kill them, he ate them, right? I mean, they're in the swamp, there's not a lot of good food, and here's all these fat and juicy young maidens and warriors just laying around, drunk, passed out. That seemed like a good, quick solution to his hunger. So Grendel came into the palace and started eating people, and he didn't know that there was a new guy in there tonight waiting for him. The new guy was Beowulf. Beowulf jumped up when Grendel grabbed him. I mean, like we would, if someone grabbed you in the middle of the night, you better jump right up. So Beowulf jumped up and grabbed Grendel's hand. Again, that's just like good self-defense tip right there. If someone sneak up on you and grab you in the middle of the night, you better grab them back. So yeah, Beowulf is not only the first one of the first legendary fantasy heroes, is also one of the first to use sensible self-defense technique. Beowulf jumped up and grabbed Grendel's hand and broke Grendel's finger, and then they started fighting there in the palace, broke a lot of furniture, broke a lot of walls, and Beowulf's warriors, his underlings, started to surround Grendel and try to cut at him with their swords and trying to stab at him with their spears, but no weapon could penetrate his skin, so they weren't doing anything other than just getting in the way. Finally, Grendel and Beowulf locked together in a grappling competition, and then Beowulf, being such a macho, badass, legendary hero, tore Grendel's arm off with his bare hand and mortally wounding Grendel. And then Grendel fled back to the swamp and then died there. And the next day, Beowulf went to the swamp to look for Grendel's corpse because he wanted to cut off Grendel's head as a trophy. Yeah, I know, it's kind of silly back then. Uh, so Beowulf went to the swamp to look for Grendel's corpse so he can get a trophy. Didn't he just rip off his arm? Why didn't he just use his arm as trophy? I don't know. I don't know. You got to ask Beowulf or whoever wrote the original story. I mean, that's the way the story went. He went to the swamp and then he ran into Grendel's mom. And Mama Grendel was not very happy because you just killed my baby. You tore off my baby's arm and my baby bled to death. It's all your fault. So Mama Grendel and Beowulf started fighting there in the swamp, and then Beowulf, being such a nice guy and being such a machismo guy, ended up killing Mama Grendel as well, and so she can be reunited with her baby. Yeah, so that's basically it. The legend of Beowulf, written back in the 8th century, one of the earliest uh, Anglo-Saxon fantasy legend. Now, I did say there's a problem with this action figure, and that is he looked kind of scrawny. Like, if we look at this guy from the back, from the side, Does he look like the strongest warrior in the world to you? I mean, he looked like he might be a good swordsman, but this is not uh, a figure that looked like someone who would be able to tear off the arm of a giant with his bare hand. So he's one of those situations where he he doesn't line up with what Beowulf would look like in my imagination when I was reading the original legend of Beowulf. I was imagining Beowulf to be like Hercules or Heracles, if you like, or Thunder God Thor, or the Incredible Hulk. I mean, tearing off the arm of a giant with his bare hand. Keep in mind, this giant has skin that can resist uh, any kind of weapon. And this giant is like 5 or 6 times the size of a regular human. Uh, yeah, have you guys ever tried to tear off the leg of a chicken before it's cooked? Next time you have a raw chicken, give it a try. Even tearing off the leg of a chicken, it's very difficult when that chicken is raw and dead and slimy and not fighting back. Now imagine if it's someone 5 times your size and trying to kill you at the same time. Yeah, so my impression was Beowulf would be a big hulking dude, not this slender uh, little guy as depicted by this action figure. Of course, we can't show just one, just like any good story. We can't just hear one side of the story. We have to see the other side. So I'm going to bring Grendel into the frame. And here he is. Now I'm going to have to hold on to him because he will tip forward if I let go. See? Just like that. As soon as I let go, he tips forward. Even though, as you can see, he has a display stand. This is bad toy making. This is like maybe I can prop him up like that. Yeah, if I uh yeah, if I prop him up like this, and he can kind of stay standing, but you don't get to see the whole body very well. So let me just hold on to him. Yeah, this is bad engineering, and I'm very disappointed in McFarlane for this one. Because when you go to the trouble of making a stand for the action figure, the point is they should be able to stand. Okay? But even on his stand, Grendel here just very tippy. I mean, yeah, of course, as soon as I say that, now he's going to stay standing. But you guys saw, like earlier when I let go, he just tipped forward. So he had a lot of problem, and most of that is because of his forward-leaning posture. Now, this Grendel looks very different from what was described in the original poem or the original story. As I mentioned earlier, Grendel has skin that's covered in scales, unable to be penetrated by any weapons. So when we hear that, we kind of imagine Grendel to be almost like a crocodile or dragon uh, giant man, like a dragon that walking on 2 feet. But what we got in this action figure is a giant, twisted, disgusting looking creature that is skinless. You can see all the sinews and muscles, like there's no skin on this creature. This look like a flayed corpse. Like It's disgusting, and it definitely makes an interesting monster, but this is not Grendel, as most of us were led to believe by the old legend. This looked more like a zombie Grendel, more like after he got killed, someone stripped the skin off of him and then bring him back as a zombie. That would be like this. With that said, this Grendel is very well sculpted, and if you look at the muscles, in all the muscles are visible because he doesn't have any skin, and this is really disgusting. You see the spine back here, the back, all the twisted strands of muscles and tendons in his arm. His arms are very long, very skinny, and he has a big head with a lot of twisted muscles showing on his skinless face. In his right hand, he's holding a victim, one of the warriors he's about to eat. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll take that off for now. Now, if you look at his right hand has one, two, three, four finger and a thumb. Left hand only have thumb back here, and then one, two, three fingers. There's one finger missing on the left hand. I'm not sure why is that, but I can guess that this is to show because the original story did say when Beowulf woke up, he grabbed Grendel's hand and broke his finger. So maybe that is in reference to that. Okay, so that's pretty cool. He is somewhat articulated. The shoulders move, the elbows move, and the waist turn. However, just like Beowulf, the problem with this figure is no matter how you change his articulation, no matter how you move, because his arm is stuck up there over his head, like he's lifting his victim, uh, this victim overhead. Where did I put him? Here. He's grabbing this victim, lifting him overhead, ready to either chow down on him or throw him. So he's stuck in that pose. Like he can maybe turn his head to look up at the victim, or he can look forward, or he can turn forward. Oh, he's going to tip over. Or he can like do this, wave at his victim, but he's essentially stuck, holding that victim in the air forever. Which, again, I knew this is a problem when I bought him, so that wasn't too big of a surprise. What it makes this Grendel figure extremely extremely problematic, is the problem with scale, with size. And let me explain. When we read the original poem, when we see Beowulf in the movie, uh, whenever they portray Grendel, he's portrayed as a giant, like a huge beast of a monster that can, yes, hold a victim up with one hand and then rip them apart. So, going by that logic, when we were offered a Grendel in the action figure form, we expected him to be really big, so he can do what Grendel does, terrorize our other warriors. But instead, we got a Grendel that is barely 7 inches tall, cannot change his pose, and just is not that big. He's kind of he's kind of twisted and scrawny looking. But here's the thing: if we look at the victim in his hand, this little warrior. We realize what's going on here. We realize this Grendel is meant to to be compared to like a 3-inch action figure because that's about how big this victim is. It's about 3 inches tall. So if we take this two and put them side by side like this, then yeah, okay, now that looks fine. That looks fine. Then Grendel looked properly big comparing to something so small like that. And I think that's what they were going for. That's why you have Grendel grabbing onto the victim like this. And when you see these two together, they are properly matched. You can appreciate the real scale of how big Grendel is supposed to be. That part's great. That part's fun. However, it creates a problem. When you make a hero and a villain, the unspoken truth, the unspoken idea, the unspoken logic is that whoever buys a Grendel will buy a Beowulf. Why? Because we want to display them together. We want them to battle it out on our shelf. We want them to have that ultimate fight on our shelf. So Grendel here is supposed to display with Beowulf here, which the problem happened. You look at them, they're the same size. They're the same size. Okay? So they don't look like they fit together. Because Beowulf is just a normal human. Beowulf is a very strong normal human. So he should be, if anything, about the size of this victim in Grendel's hand, not this big. And he shouldn't be the same size as Grendel. So to make a proper Beowulf and Grendel fight, McFarlane really missed the mark. He either had to make Beowulf 3 inches, very small, or he had to make Grendel 15 inches, very big. But instead, he made them the same size, which creates this eternal awkwardness on my bookshelf. A Beowulf who's the same size and stature as Grendel, which means they just can't uh, be on the same shelf with each other. They have to be forever kept apart. Otherwise, they look silly together. This is why I didn't get the rest of the Beowulf series of action figure because of the scale difficulty. It was a very awkward series with really bad articulation, and for the most part, because I just wanted figures to reflect the old poem, I only needed Beowulf and Grendel anyway. Even though this action figure line was plagued with problems, and in fact they were made when McFarlane was really going downhill and soon to be fading into uh, just a side note in action figure making. How once the king of action figures had fallen. It was great to get some souvenirs that reflect the English class I had to take when I was a child. And also, in a very big way, these two characters opened the curtain of high fantasy, epic fantasy, medieval swords and sorcery for all the other writers, authors, readers to come. So I'm glad to have them, and uh, I hope that you guys, especially those of you that might have children that are getting to the point where they have to read Beowulf, or you still remember reading Beowulf, I hope this has been an interesting, if lengthy, episode. I'll see you guys shortly for Fitness Friday. For now, enjoy the rest of the afternoon and lay off the firework, please.